everyone. My name is Eugeniusz Romer, and this is Układ Sił, the YouTube channel of the Polish magazine about foreign policy, international relations. And today I'm very pleased to host Ilan Berman, a senior vice president of the American Foreign Policy Council in Washington, D.C. Welcome, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And today we are going to discuss the approach of the current American administration towards Middle East and many complicated, I would say, issues regarding this region. But I think the key to understand this approach is Israel, because this country is perceived by American conservatives, the Republican Party, as a staunch ally of the United States. And we are going to discuss issues regarding this country. So I think we are going to start with Syria, because recently Israel, I think, found itself in odds with the current Syrian regime, I should say, or president, ad interim president. And recently, also in May, we've seen Donald Trump praising the new Syrian president, Ahmad al-Shara, and Donald Trump even decided to lift the sanctions that were imposed on this country. So how do you think this current situation, this dispute over Druze minority in Syria between Syrian authorities and Israel, is going to influence the American approach towards those two countries?
Well, there's a couple of things here, and I think it's necessary to to explain. What we're seeing in Syria over the last 6 months is really unprecedented. If we had had this conversation a year ago, and you had said that Syria was under new management and it was on track to become a potential ally of Israel, I think it would have been perceived as crazy. And yet, in December, you saw the very rapid collapse of the Assad regime in the face of opposition spearheaded by an Islamist group, HTS. And HTS very quickly took over Aleppo and other cities and expanded its reach and led to the toppling of the Assad regime. And what we've seen since has been this really interesting, I think, transformation in process that's happening in Damascus. HTS was a one-time Al-Qaeda affiliate. Their leader, who now goes by Ahmed al-Shara, his combat name was Mohammed al-Jilani. He was, until very, very recently, designated as a global terrorist by the U.S. government. And yet, over the last few months, you've really seen al-Shara try to turn over a new leaf. At least it appears that he's trying to turn over a new leaf in terms of diplomatic engagement, in terms of outreach to the United States, outreach to Israel. There's even now credible evidence that Israel and Syria are having a discussion. And so here in Washington, rumors are floating around about the potential for Syria to become a new partner in the Abraham Accords and everything else. And this approach on the part of al-Shara is I think, really showing dividends. And you see the Trump administration scaling back American pressure, rescinding sanctions on Syria. And this is precisely what al-Shara is trying to do. He's trying to rehabilitate the country in the eyes of the world. And so far, at least, he's doing a pretty good job. The problem that he's having is twofold. One is authenticity, and the other is control. Authenticity with regard to, there are serious questions that still remain in the minds of some people about how far this transformation goes, whether he's really given up his jihadist credentials, whether he's really now a moderate leader, and he is going to be willing and able to commit to precisely this kind of political moderation that he's talking about when he goes to places like Riyadh, for example. The other is control, because HTS controls a large part of the country, but it doesn't control all of the country. And there are pockets of resistance. The Islamic State terrorist group, for example, in the east of Syria, is carrying out terrorist attacks on a regular basis. There is turbulence between the al-Shara government and ethnic minorities in Syria. And this is where the Druze come in, because what we've seen over the last several days has been efforts by pressure from al-Shara affiliated militias against the Druze in the south of Syria, abutting Israel. And the reason this is significant is because it has begun to implicate Israel's own Druze community. The Druze are a nomadic peoples. They stretch across territorial boundaries. And so there's lots of familial and societal connections between Israel's Druze in the north and Syria's Druze in Syria's south. And so when the Israeli Druze saw pressure being exerted upon their kinsmen in the south of Syria, they migrated north across the border to try to combat these forces and to try to provide protection. And the conflict became so pitched that Israel felt compelled to carry out military strikes in the south of Syria, even as far north as Damascus, as a signal that Israel is prepared. Israel sees itself as a protector of the Druze. And to the extent that the Druze community in Israel sees connections to the Druze in Syria, Israel is positioning itself as a protector of the Druze in Syria as well. So I think this conflict has been tampened down for now, but it really, I think, highlights a lot of the sort of the underlying frictions. The questions about al-Shara's moderation, the questions about his control over the country, and the questions about whether a peace between Israel and Syria is actually really possible.
Yeah, so many experts, they believe actually Israel is hitting Syria because Israel doesn't want Syria to unite fully, because such organized, centralized government strong in Syria might pose a threat in the future to Israel. So that's why Israel intervened, sensing an opportunity to do this, let's say using this Druze conflict or conflict over Druze minority. So do you think this is a credible explanation? Also, Israeli authorities, they said that they don't believe in the change that you described of Ahmed al-Shara. He's still an Islamist. Maybe he's hiding, but barely hiding his true face. But yeah, in truth, he's just an Islamist fighter. So do you think this is a credible explanation of this whole situation?
So I don't think so, for a very simple reason, because Israel, when HTS overthrew the Assad regime late last year, also sort of migrating into early this year, Israel carried out military strikes that eliminated something like 90% of Syria's military capabilities for precisely this reason, right? Because they were afraid that an Islamist regime in Damascus, if it maintained its military prowess, its military equipment, could pose a threat to Israel itself. And so Israel did a very comprehensive job of eroding the military potential of Syria. This is, unfortunately, though, a double-edged sword, because it's created a situation where the Syrian regime is not a threat to Israel, definitely, but it's also more difficult for the Syrian regime to exert control over the entirety of its territory. So I actually see what Israel has been doing with regard to the Druze as being driven by something else. Because I do think there is skepticism. I think you're totally right. There is skepticism in Jerusalem about whether al-Shara has really turned over a new leaf. But in reality, I think Israel is fighting a multi-front war. I think Israeli officials would like nothing better than to have a situation where the Syrian regime is actually a friend, or maybe if not a friend, then is at least not an enemy any longer. So I think they're skeptical, but I think they're cautiously optimistic that it may be possible. I don't think what the Israelis are doing is intended to fragment al-Shara's control. Insofar as if al-Shara is really authentic in his moderation, fragmenting his control actually sets the stage for more Islamist currents in Syria. But I think that there is this interesting balancing, right? Because on the one hand, you have this skepticism about whether Syria is really moving in a moderate direction. And anytime you have ethnic clashes in Syria, and this is not the first time it's happened, you had earlier ethnic clashes this spring between al-Shara's Sunni-dominated government and the Syrian Alawites. who were the power base of former Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. And now you have a clash with another minority, with the Druze. And so this really casts doubt on whether al-Shara is authentic, whether, maybe he is reverting to type, maybe he is reverting to more extremist actions. So what I think the Israelis are trying to do is they're trying to set guardrails. First of all, on the one hand, they eliminated Syria's military capability to limit the threat that Syria can pose to Israel. And now they're demonstrating through action to the Syrian regime, here's acceptable conduct and here's not acceptable conduct.
And maybe my final question regarding this topic, do you believe in this change presented by Ahmed al-Shara? Do you believe that he's truly, let's say, converting from an Islamist into a more moderate leader?
Honestly, I think it's a little bit too early to tell. I think the early signs are good. A lot of the things that he's doing in terms of economic transformation, in terms of societal integration, frankly, weren't conceivable 6 months ago. But I think there's a long road still to travel. I think the temptation, first of all, to revert back to more extreme policies is very high. It's especially high when he's facing internal challenges to his rule. On the part of Islamist elements. And also, one of the reasons why the Trump administration, as well as Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, for example, are trying very hard to engage with al-Shara is to keep him on the current path, to incentivize him to moderate. I think it remains to be seen. But from countries like Israel, countries like Jordan, countries like Turkey, who are not who are geographically proximate, who are have a front row seat to what's happening in Syria, they're watching this very closely. And as the Israelis have demonstrated, they're willing to act to try to shape Syrian behavior in the proper direction. It's not just economic inducements, it's also concrete actions that demonstrate to the new Syrian government, this is not permissible.
Okay, so maybe we should switch to Gaza, because I think this place is very, let's say, inflammatory for the whole Middle East region, and especially in the symbolic, let's say, layer. So what actually the Americans want to achieve, proposing the ceasefire, pressuring two sides to sign it? What the current administration is pursuing in Gaza regarding also to Israel?
Right. No. I think this is the central question, really, because Gaza is unlike what we saw in Lebanon with regard to Israeli military action, what we saw in Iran with regard to Israeli military action. Gaza is very complicated, and the Israelis are, there's not a clear-cut success that you can see. And part of the reason, I think, goes back to the orienting goals of Israel's military campaign. When after the terrorist attacks, the massacre of October 7th, Israel laid out two strategic goals: to remove Hamas from power and to regain all their hostages. And from the start, it's been very clear that these goals are in tension with one another. It's, if Hamas is removed from power, it's difficult to conceive of the hostages being returned, and vice versa. So this is where Israel's running into a lot of difficulty. I think the Trump administration has given Israel a lot of latitude to try to figure out its strategy, but it's very clear that there isn't a clear-cut victory the way there was against Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the way there was against Iran in the recent war over their nuclear program. And so what you're seeing increasingly here in Washington is signals from the White House that, now that America has supported Israel in the context of Iran, in the context of amplifying what Israel has done against Iran's nuclear program, the expectation is that Israel needs to wind down its campaign in Gaza. The expectation is that we have to start increasingly pressuring them to think about the day after, them to think about sort of what comes next. This is, I think, problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, because there isn't a lot of regional buy-in for articulating what a future for Gaza may look like. There's a lot of countries in the region that are talking about the need for a future for Gaza, but there's not a lot of countries in the region, certainly in the Gulf, that are laying out concrete proposals about what's going to happen after the war in Gaza. And the second is because all politics are local. And the current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has a very rigid far-right coalition that he wants to preserve in order to preserve his hold on power. And this coalition has made it very clear that there are parties that will vacate the government, that will leave the government and cause the collapse of the government if there is some sort of compromise with Hamas. So the Israeli prime minister is constrained in terms of what he can do.
Yeah, so let me also ask, do you think that the allegations regarding corruption scandals that he's facing, maybe the prosecution when he's not the prime minister anymore, do you think that this is something also that matters in this case?
I think it matters in terms of optics. The fact that you're asking this question, I think, shows that it matters in terms of the public perception. But I think it's probably inaccurate to say that the prime minister's own motivations for his political survival, right? I mean, obviously, they factor in somewhere in there, but I don't think they're the driving force for the conflict. I think, frankly, a much more problematic thing is that Israel is waging a strategy that has a lot of internal contradictions in Gaza. And they don't see a clean break. They don't see a situation where they can really disengage without an extended period of military rule, without a transplantation of the Gaza population, without any of these other scenarios that, frankly, are not acceptable either to the international community or to the Israelis themselves. I think that's the reason you're seeing this slowdown. You're seeing Israel trying to find its way in Gaza much more than the corruption and the the domestic politics. Although I'm sure that plays some role.
So do you think that there is a limit of patience within the current American administration towards Israel? In other words, do you think that the Americans are going to say, okay, you have particular time deadline to reach a ceasefire? If you don't, we are not going to support you anymore? Because many other Western countries are showing, let's say, impatience, or they're condemning the actions that Israel is undertaking in Gaza. They believe that Israel is violating human rights, and these are, let's say, serious countries. This is not only Arab propaganda, I would say, but countries like France, like the UK or Canada are saying this. So, do you think that there is a certain limit of patience in America?
Oh no, for sure. And I think, frankly, you can see this in the way the Trump administration is changing its attitude towards Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war. Because it's very clear that the president would have liked to have Russian President Vladimir Putin come to the table and hammer out a compromise. But I think, frankly, I think the Ukrainian strategy of creating the space to let Putin be Putin and to show Trump that Putin is the way he is has been, I think, very effective. And now you're seeing the American change of policy, the course correction that you're seeing in the White House vis-a-vis Russia. And I think that same sort of formula holds in the context of Israel, because it's clear that the relationship is very good. It's the strategic partnership is very good. But it's also clear from where I'm sitting here in Washington that the Trump administration sees American support for what Israel did in Iran as a sort of trade-off for de-escalation in Gaza, because the president has said that he wants de-escalation in Gaza. I think we'll never get to a situation where there's really a rupture, but I do think that the government in Israel understands that it has an imperative to wind down operations to seek a compromise. And my last point on this is actually really difficult, because I think you're seeing, especially as a result of this, you're seeing more willingness on the part of the Israelis to have a ceasefire, to have a compromise. But it takes two to tango. And so now we're running into a situation where the Israelis are more amenable to scaling down the conflict, to winding it down. But they still need to receive something. And America has a lot of pressure over, a lot of leverage over Israel, and it can exert a lot of pressure, but it doesn't have a lot of leverage over Hamas. And Hamas has to be the one to come to the table. So it's unclear to me where this goes, but it's very clear to me that the Israeli government understands that, now the duty's on Israel to scale down, to wind down its Gaza operations.
Yeah, I think this is also very probable that Hamas understands this logic and probably does it on purpose to hear more accusations of Israel of violating human rights, for example, in Gaza, and not wanting to stop the war. So this is very complicated. Hopefully, we are going to see a solution soon. So you mentioned Iran. We are certainly going to discuss this issue as well. But I would like to discuss the Houthis problem as well, because I think it shows something very important about the approach that America has towards the, let's say, general world order, because America was traditionally perceived as a country that protects the freedom of navigation, and the Americans, they did it, attacking the Houthis and reaching a ceasefire, which I think has been recently broken by the Houthis because they attacked a ship on the Red Sea. But also, what we learned from the messages that leaked from a group where Vice President J.D. Vance was, also Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, they both strongly criticized, for example, Europeans. They said that Europeans should take care of this part of the world because this is more European issue. So it shows totally different approach of the current administration to the traditional role that America should have. So do you believe that this is a strong signal that America is withdrawing, maybe isolating, or not going to be a world policeman anymore?
So I think there's obviously here in Washington there is that tension, there is that back and forth. But remember that leaked signal chat, that leaked small group conversation that included the Secretary of Defense and the Vice President happened well before the Trump administration's shall we call it a truce with the Houthis in May, where the Trump administration essentially hammered out a separate deal with the Houthis to stop targeting American ships. But so I think what we're seeing in terms of American policy is there is that internal tension between folks in the administration who want to pull back, who want a more restrained, a more isolationist role, and traditional American foreign policy conservatives who want a more forceful role. But the Houthis, I think, is where these two come together, because the Houthis are a crucial test now for the Trump administration for two reasons. Because the Trump administration is pursuing a very significant and very broad economic policy of coercive economics in terms of tariffs, in terms of trade, in terms of rebalancing American commercial relations. And part of that has to be a guarantee that America has the ability to sort of to stabilize the international economic system. And the Houthis have the ability to throw a wrench in that because they are disrupting maritime commerce. And the second is that this flare-up, right? We had a long period where the Houthis were not active, but now you have a situation where the Houthis are active again. This was very predictable because the Houthis are a proxy of Iran. And as Israel has eroded Iran's proxy in Lebanon, as Israel has eroded Iran's own internal military capabilities and military leadership, there is frankly, as Israel degrades the capabilities of another proxy, Hamas, in the Gaza Strip, there is a very natural impulse on the part of the Iranian regime to show that it's still relevant, that it still matters. And activating other parts of the proxy network is a very natural thing to do. And by the way, it also dovetails with the desires of the Houthis themselves, because the Houthis, have suddenly stumbled into international relevance. Before, really, nobody knew about them. Before they started this targeting campaign, nobody knew about them. Now everybody understands that they're a global threat. This is a position that I think is going to be hard for them to step back. They have to be coerced to step back. But all of those things make dealing with the Houthis a really significant challenge and a really pressing challenge for the United States in the Middle East.
Okay, so let's go. Let's move to Iran because you mentioned it many times. So, of course, when we think of Iran, we think of the recent attacks that were undertaken by the administration and the American forces. So right after those attacks, there were allegations and some media leaks that actually those nuclear sites were not completely destroyed, and Iran maybe manage to move some enriched uranium, or maybe is going to, let's say, resume the enriching of uranium within several months, because not all the sites were completely destroyed. Recently, I believe NBC News reported also that Fordo site was almost completely destroyed, but two other not really. And this is very probable that the Iranians are going to produce enriched uranium soon. So do you think that this is probable? Because the administration was clear, those three nuclear sites were, as they said, completely obliterated.
Well, I think this is a sort of a conversation in process. And I think, the White House very naturally had a vested interest in having a very expansive interpretation of how effective the American military strikes were. And by the same token, the Iranians had a vested interest in saying, nothing is damaged. We're doing business as usual. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And I think this is one to watch for three reasons. First of all, the Iranians are very clearly have this nuclear will to power. Everything Israel did, everything the United States did, these were not regime change operations. These were operations that were targeted towards Iran's military sites. The same regime is still in place, and the same regime still wants to acquire this capability. The question they have is, will they be allowed to do so? Do they have to go slow? Can they go fast? Right. And this is why you're seeing a lot of conversations now. And the Israeli prime minister was just here in Washington. There were a lot of conversations about whether Israel has a green light to operate again if there are signs that Iran is resuming its nuclear activity. That's the first. The second is the question of what Europe does, because we are just months away from the final expiration of the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. The last remaining provision that's in force is the ability of the P5+1 countries to activate what's called snapback, to reimpose multilateral sanctions on Iran for its nuclear work. The European governments, and through both individually and also through the European Commission, they're signaling to Iran, as we speak, that you have to hammer out a deal with the Trump administration. And you have to do that by August, or we're going to invoke snapback. So what they're trying to do is, I think, this is very constructive, and I think it's applying diplomatic pressure on top of this military coercive pressure. Whether this actually amounts to anything remains to be seen, but it's very clear that if there's actual teeth to this threat of snapback, the Iranians understand that it will be very difficult for them to reconstitute their nuclear program and even operate their economy after August if they don't come to the table. And
so
third,
do you think? Yeah,
no, sorry.
Please go on. I thought you stopped.
No, one more. And the third thing is the question of what happens within Iran itself. What we didn't see in June as a result of the Israeli strikes was an activation of the Iranian opposition. And this is, I think, a very important point, because for a dozen years or so, we've been hearing from Iranian opposition groups that, all you have to do is crack open a window and we will do the rest. And here you saw a regime that was, sort of on the back foot strategically, that had been attacked by Israel and the United States. There was an opportunity for the opposition, and they either didn't have the ability to take that opportunity. And so what you see now is the Iranian regime is trying to solidify and harden its hold on power internally through repression, through arrests, through new laws that are more restrictive. And so the question of what happens internally in Iran, in terms of control by the RGC, in terms of succession, all of that is going to have a very significant impact on how this goes, how this standoff with the West goes.
So the situation, as you described it, is now that it's actually developing, and we don't know in the future whether the Americans are going to be engaged in Iran in the dispute over this nuclear issue between Israel and Iran in the future. So, how is it perceived by the MAGA faction within the administration or the voters of Donald Trump? Because Donald Trump was the one who promised to stop the engagement in endless wars, especially in the Middle East, and now he attacked Iran. Okay, it was one-time thing, right? But in the future, as you say, they might occur some circumstances that are going to need Americans to intervene. So do you think this is something that is going to be very complicated to do due to the MAGA faction and the expectations of the American voters?
So I think it's a great question, and I think it remains to be seen. Certainly, President Trump has campaigned on a foreign policy of de-escalation, right, to sort of resolve conflicts, to bring them to a close, whether it's in Gaza or with Iran or with Russia and Ukraine. I think because President Trump has such a firm hold on MAGA politics generally, he was able to explain to his base the need to act against Iran. I think that becomes more difficult if America is forced to do it again and again and again, right? A one-time American military operation, I think is something that he can explain. I think it becomes harder to explain if America is drawn into an escalating conflict in the Middle East. And that's precisely why the United States is coordinating so closely with Israel, because if there is an understanding on the part of Washington that Iran is reconstituting its nuclear program, is rebuilding its capabilities and needs to be stopped again, it doesn't want to be the one to do it. So it wants to give the green light preemptively and let the Iranians know that it has given the green light to the Israelis to take care of the business for political purposes as well.
Thank you very much. These were all my questions. I think your answers were brilliant, so thank you for this comprehensive interview. I was hosting Ilan Berman from the American Foreign Policy Council in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And many thanks to our viewers. Goodbye.